Welcome to our channel. We're so glad you're here, and we deeply appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to join our community. Today's story is a gripping tale of injustice, courage, and a stunning courtroom twist. Late at night in Atlanta, Georgia, Michael Carter, a seasoned U.S. assistant attorney, was pulled over for no reason. Dragged from his car and falsely accused, he faced a system stacked against him until he revealed his true identity, flipping the script on corrupt cops and a biased judge. This is a story of one man's fight to expose a broken system, proving that truth can shatter even the strongest lies. Late at night in Atlanta, Georgia, the streets were mostly quiet, save for the occasional hum of traffic lights flickering from red to green. Michael Carter, a 38-year-old assistant U.S. attorney, had just left a dinner with colleagues. He wasn't thinking about workplace injustices or courtroom battles, just getting home. That changed the moment he saw flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. Sighing, he signaled, pulled over, and reached for his wallet. He wasn't speeding. He hadn't run a red light. There was no reason for the stop, but he knew better than to assume the reason mattered. Two officers approached his window. Officer Daniel Harris, tall and broad with a military buzz cut, stood on the driver's side. Officer Stephen Walsh, lean but no less imposing, lingered by the passenger door. "License and registration," Harris said, his voice clipped. Michael handed over his documents. "Can I ask why I was stopped?" Harris glanced at Walsh before answering. "Your taillight's out." Michael frowned. That was a lie. His car had just passed inspection, and the reflection in his rear view showed his brake lights working perfectly. "You sure about that?" Michael asked, keeping his voice even. Harris's expression shifted slightly. He leaned in. "Sir, step out of the vehicle." Tension crept through Michael's limbs. He'd prosecuted cases like this, routine stops escalating into something far worse. His instincts told him to comply, but his experience warned him these officers were already pushing boundaries. "I'm not getting out until you tell me why." Walsh smirked, resting a hand on his belt. "Because we said so." Michael took a breath. He knew the law. He'd studied it for years, enforced it, defended it. He knew he didn't have to exit the car without probable cause. "I have a right to ask why I'm being ordered out of my vehicle." Harris's patience snapped. He yanked the door open. "Get out." Before Michael could react, Harris grabbed his wrist, pulling him forward. The seatbelt caught his chest, digging into his shoulder. "What the hell are you doing?" Michael snapped instinctively, pulling back. Harris didn't answer. He just gripped harder. Seconds later, Walsh was on the other side, twisting Michael's arm behind his back. The sharp edge of metal handcuffs bit into his skin. "You're resisting," Harris said coldly. Michael stared in disbelief as Walsh pinned him against the hood of his own car. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from rage. This was a setup, a game, and they thought they'd already won. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The courtroom in the Fulton County Courthouse was packed. The air was thick with the routine shuffle of clerks sorting papers, the occasional cough, the low hum of whispered conversations. But beneath it, something else simmered. Michael Carter sat at the defense table, his posture straight, but restrained. Today, he wasn't here as an attorney. He was the defendant, charged with resisting arrest, obstructing justice, and disorderly conduct, complete fabrications. Michael already knew the truth didn't always matter. What mattered was what could be proven. At the front of the room, Judge Evelyn Caldwell looked down from the bench. In her late 60s, she carried an iron grip that commanded authority, earned or not. Her reputation was tough, uncompromising, dismissive of nonsense. From the way she barely glanced at Michael, he already knew where this was headed. The prosecutor, Robert Ellison, moved with a confidence that came from knowing the odds were in his favor. He adjusted his tie and nodded to the officers, who sat smugly at the witness stand. Michael watched as Harris and Walsh sat tall, backed by the full weight of the system. "Your Honor," Ellison began, "this is a straightforward case of a man escalating a routine stop into a physical confrontation with law enforcement." Michael exhaled slowly. The arrogance, the audacity. Ellison continued, flipping through his notes. The defendant refused to comply with lawful orders, became aggressive, and had to be restrained for the safety of all involved. Michael's attorney, Thomas Rivera, a overworked, underpaid public defender, jumped up. "Objection. There's no evidence my client was aggressive." Judge Caldwell waved a hand dismissively. "Overruled." Michael clenched his jaw. That was quick. Rivera sighed but pressed forward. "Your Honor, the officers escalated the situation without valid cause. There's no body cam footage showing my client acting aggressively because such footage doesn't exist." Ellison smirked. The body cams malfunctioned during the arrest, but the officers' statements are more than sufficient evidence. Michael nearly laughed at the absurdity. The officer's word was all they needed. Convenient. Harris took the stand first, delivering his well-rehearsed lines. The defendant was belligerent from the start. He refused to exit the vehicle, raised his voice, created a hostile environment. Lies, every word. Walsh followed, nodding along, adding, "He tensed up. We feared for our safety. We had no choice but to restrain him." More lies. Michael's fingers curled into fists under the table. He'd spent his career fighting this kind of blatant corruption, and now he was living it firsthand. Judge Caldwell barely hid her impatience as she glanced at Michael's attorney. "Anything else, Mr. Rivera?" Rivera hesitated. He knew this judge, knew her record. She wasn't interested in justice. Still, he swallowed hard and pushed forward. "Yes, Your Honor, the defense calls Michael Carter to the stand." And so it was. As Michael stood and walked to the witness stand, he felt every pair of eyes on him, the judge, the jury, the officers, waiting to see if he'd crack. He wouldn't, because what was about to happen would change everything. Michael sat in the witness chair, exhaling slowly as the court clerk swore him in. His hands rested lightly on his lap, but inside he was seething. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to expose the truth. Prosecutor Ellison stepped forward, pacing slightly, an unnecessary display of confidence. "Mr. Carter, would you say you complied with the officer's instructions during the traffic stop?" Michael met his gaze, calm, composed. "I asked why I was being ordered out of my vehicle. That's not illegal." Ellison feigned a sigh. "You refused to exit, correct?" "I asked why I was being asked to exit," Michael repeated. "By law, I have that right." Ellison smirked, glancing at the jury as if Michael's intellect was an inconvenience. And after multiple orders, you still didn't comply. Michael held his gaze, because there was no lawful basis for it. Ellison turned to the judge, shaking his head as if he'd expected nothing less. "Your Honor, it's clear the defendant—" Michael leaned forward. "Before we go any further, I should probably disclose something." Silence. Ellison froze. Even Judge Caldwell looked up, actually looking at him for the first time. Michael reached into his briefcase. His attorney, Rivera, tensed, unsure what was happening. Michael slowly pulled out his badge, a small, simple rectangle that suddenly became the most dangerous thing in that courtroom. "I'm Michael Carter," he said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Georgia." The room froze. Judge Caldwell's lips parted slightly. Her gavel hovered over the desk, unmoving. The officers stiffened. Walsh's knee bounced under the table. Harris's jaw tightened. Ellison's face paled. "Excuse me?" Michael tilted his head. "Did I stutter?" The air shifted. The jury leaned forward. The court stenographer stopped typing. Even Rivera, his own attorney, looked like he'd been hit by a freight train. "You're a federal prosecutor?" Ellison's voice wavered slightly. Michael raised his badge. "That's what this means, doesn't it?" And just like that, the entire case collapsed. Judge Caldwell leaned back, her mouth a thin line. She knew if she ruled against Michael, if she dismissed his testimony and sided with these officers, this wouldn't just be another forgotten case. It would be a scandal. The courtroom was no longer just a courtroom, it was a powder keg, and Michael had just lit the fuse. The room didn't breathe. Judge Caldwell gripped her gavel tighter but didn't strike it. She was thinking, calculating. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a career-ending disaster in the making. Ellison swallowed hard, his smooth arrogance gone. He glanced at the officers, and for the first time, Harris and Walsh looked nervous. Michael sat there, watching the silent scramble for control. He'd seen it 100 times before, in boardrooms, in office meetings, in hushed conversations between prosecutors when the wrong case landed on their desk. But this time, he was the one making them sweat. "I wasn't aware of this information," Ellison stammered, flipping through his files like a man searching for an emergency exit. "Your Honor!" Judge Caldwell raised a hand, silencing him. For the first time, her eyes locked on Michael, his presence now a threat in itself. A federal prosecutor, wrongfully arrested, assaulted, lied about. If this had gone unnoticed, he could have been just another nameless statistic. And she knew it. She turned to the officers. "Harris, Walsh," she said. Both men sat up straight, like kids about to be scolded. "Would you like to amend your statements?" The crack in their composure was audible. Michael could see it unfolding. Harris's fingers gripped his knee. Walsh glanced at Ellison, hoping for a lifeline. Michael spoke first. "Before they answer, Your Honor, I'd like to request that the court subpoena the dispatch call logs from the night of my arrest." Ellison flinched. Michael wasn't guessing. He knew how this worked. If those officers had called in the stop, their lie about the taillight wouldn't hold. If they hadn't, they'd violated protocol from the start. Judge Caldwell stared at him for a long moment. She was trapped. If she denied his request, she was burying evidence. If she granted it, she was handing Michael the final nail for their coffin. She cleared her throat. Request granted. Harris exhaled sharply, his composure finally breaking. Walsh shifted awkwardly, his jaw clenched. They knew what was coming. Michael leaned back in his seat. He wasn't done, because this case wouldn't stay in this courtroom. It started with one reporter in the back of the room, a young journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, furiously typing on her laptop. Within hours, the story spread. By the next morning, Michael's name was everywhere. Assistant U.S. Attorney wrongfully arrested. Federal prosecutor exposes corrupt Atlanta cops in open court. Judge criticized for bias against black defendant who was a federal attorney. The internet exploded. Social media was flooded with clips from the courtroom, captured by people who'd been there when Michael flashed his badge. The video went viral, spreading across platforms like wildfire. Cable news ran segments on the fallout, asking how many others had been targeted like Michael, but lacked the power or position to fight back. But the biggest shift happened in Atlanta itself. Community activists organized rallies. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, demanding accountability. Civil rights attorneys dug into old cases Judge Caldwell had presided over, looking for patterns of bias. Then came the real blow. An anonymous leak of internal police records, emails between officers discussing how to justify questionable stops, reports from other black drivers who'd been pulled over, charged with false violations, and threatened with arrest if they pushed back. This wasn't just about Michael Carter anymore. It was about a system that had operated in the dark for years. And now, the spotlight was on. But those in power didn't go down without a fight. The backlash was swift. City officials scrambled. The police department issued a carefully worded statement, and Judge Caldwell's office suddenly stopped taking calls. By the end of the week, the Atlanta Police Department announced an internal investigation, a performative gesture, Michael knew. He'd seen it before. A distraction, a way to placate the public without real change. But this time, it wasn't enough. The pressure kept building. A civil rights attorney filed a federal lawsuit against the department on behalf of past victims. Community leaders called for Judge Caldwell's removal. Protesters refused to back down. And then came the real moment of reckoning. The case was referred to the Georgia Attorney General for review. Michael sat in his apartment, watching the press conference. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters, lawyers, people who'd been through what he had, but didn't have a badge to fight back with. This wasn't just damage control anymore. They were running out of ways to hide. Judge Caldwell knew it too. By the time Michael returned to court for the verdict, her demeanor had changed. No more casual indifference, no more smug confidence. She was staring at a case too big to bury, and she had to decide which side of history she wanted to be on. The courtroom was silent. Judge Caldwell cleared her throat, the weight of the past few weeks heavy on her shoulders. Protests, media scrutiny, leaked files. She had no good options left. She looked down at her notes, but everyone knew this ruling wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the public. She exhaled, lowering her gavel softly. After reviewing the evidence, the court finds the defendant. She hesitated for just a second, then finally said, "Not guilty." A wave of relief crashed over Michael, but he didn't move, didn't react. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about him. The officers sat rigid, their faces pale. Walsh's hands were clenched, his career flashing before his eyes. Harris, always the more arrogant of the two, leaned forward. "Your Honor, we—" She raised a hand. "The court will also refer all relevant materials to the state attorney's office for further review." The courtroom erupted, murmurs, gasps, the rapid clicking of reporters' keyboards. For the first time, the system was turning its gaze on itself. Michael stood slowly. His attorney clapped him on the back, but his eyes were on the officers, on Prosecutor Ellison, who looked like he'd just lost everything, and on Judge Caldwell, who'd spent years dismissing cases like his until she was forced to do otherwise. But most of all, he was thinking about the people who weren't in that room, the ones who'd sat in that same seat before him, the ones who never walked away free. As he stepped out of the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, people cheered. But Michael didn't celebrate, because this wasn't a victory. It was proof of what had always been happening, but only now, with the world watching, was the system forced to respond. And he knew the fight wasn't over. Not for him, not for the people still caught in its grip. He walked past the flashing lights into the crowd, where voices demanded real change, because one case wasn't enough, and now no one was looking away. If this story made you pause for even a second, it's time to ask yourself, how many more stories like this are out there? How many people never get their day in court, their names never make the news, their truth never heard? It's not enough to just see injustice. We have to challenge it. So, if you believe real justice means holding power accountable, share this story. Talk about it. Shine a light. Because the more people refuse to look away, the harder it is to sweep these cases under the rug. And that's how change begins.